welcome to my fourth art commentary. Today I'm going to be commentating on some renders. So yeah, here we go. First up, interesting use of lighting over here. So as you can see, this hat looks like it was made from wax. It's giving kind of a translucent effect, and that is due to the lighting. So it seems like there's way too much lighting, and what it's doing is it's leaking out onto the inside of the hat and causing these otherwise normal lines on the hat to be shaded oddly, and it's just making it look weird. So what I'd recommend doing is, again, just decreasing the amount of lights that you have to get rid of this effect. Besides that, though, first impressions, this is a very desaturated render. There's not too much color besides the pink that you see here, and then the little spots of pink over there, and also maybe, if you want to count this, there's red underneath her eyes right here, but you can barely see that, so it's whatever. And the lighting has everything to do with this. So as you can see, we have an area light, right, pointing down here, and then we have probably another area light pointing onto this hat. Then we have another area light pointing onto her shoulder, and then probably some more lights down here casting lighting onto the legs, especially on this side as well. And then it's doing like whatever reflecting if you're using cycles, and then like casting generated shadows if you're using Eevee. The issue with this is that obviously I'm pretty sure you're using cycles here, so besides that, it's making it look like you're using Eevee, and that isn't a good thing because cycles is meant to be a realistic render engine, whereas Eevee is supposed to be more stylized, right? So what's happening here is, yeah, you just have way too many lights hitting in all different directions. And from what I can tell, it seems like you're using mostly area lights, because if you were using any spotlights, I'd see the reflection of the spotlight being cast onto this reflective wall right here. And that doesn't seem to be happening, and also the surfaces would be more shiny, which I'm pretty sure this looks like an area light right here. And same with right here, although that's a very weirdly shaped one if it is. So if that is the case, then please decrease the amount of lights that you have here. It's really bringing down the essence of this lighting, because you have one color here. You can make it really monochromatic except for this one color, and you're not because of the lighting. By the way, you've got really nice rims on her head, but they just kind of, they're nowhere else to be seen. So what I'd recommend is getting rid of all the lights on this side, and then adding them moving the lights that are on this side over to here. Only a few, because you don't want too many lights to be on this side and sort of even it out. You don't want that. You want contrast, right? So have more lights on this side than on this side, and then you'll be good, because what that's going to create is a good level of contrast between where the shadows should be and where the area lights should be, and it'll create a good sense of three-point lighting, if you want to call it that. You could probably add a pink-ish soft light right here, and that'll reflect off the legs to create nice pink lighting for soft lighting. You can do that if you want to. I'm just recommending that you take the powerful spotlights that are hitting on this side and move just a few over on the other side. Additionally, what I'd also do is, again, instead of using point lights, which are the little circles and they hit light in all different directions, right? You could try using spotlights, and these are the cone-shaped ones that have like a little arrow and then a dot there. And what the dot does is it controls the size of the cone, and then the arrow, it controls how long the cone is, right? And this will create a really good contrasting lights if you have the wattage set really high, but the spotlight set to really small and really long, right? So oftentimes I'll use that only if I have background with my render character, because you know, what spotlights will do is they'll reflect light in all different directions, which means if you have a background that's like super shiny, then it'll just mess it up and cause this weird reflection of light that doesn't seem to be coming from any visible light source from the background. So that's when spotlights will come in, and they're good to use to add artificial rims that pretend like they're coming from light source that's actually in the background but aren't actually. So I'd recommend trying that out as well. Now, exactly where I'd put these rims is along her shoulders, maybe less on this side, because as I said before, you should really disable the amount of lights that you have on the left side over here to increase the contrast, so that this image is more balanced. So I guess predominantly more on the right side over here with really strong rims, and then if you want to, you can add like little touches over here and on her legs and by her hands and whatnot, right? But this up here is what we're trying to avoid. We don't want the over pollution of lights. So by getting rid of the lights on this side, you'll darken this area up and effectively darken the entire right side up so that there's more visible contrast. And that is not to say you can't have a character that has light coming from more than one side, right? You can, obviously, and it works in many cases. But the thing about having lights coming from 2 different directions, or 3 or 4, or how many ever you'd like to have coming from different directions, what usually happens is that the artist will have too many lights, right? And that's what's happening here, is you have way too many lights that are they're really taking the vibrance out of this image, and it's really like dampening the whole vibes, I guess, that you get from this image and the potential color scheme that you could have had you not used white lights. Speaking of white lights, I would highly recommend making your rims sort pink, right? Because the only 2 places that you have this color pink are right here on this band, I guess, and then here on her straps, and also on her hat. So what I'd recommend is take charge of this color scheme. It's monochromatic except for one color, and then use it on maybe her right side a little bit. Again, like as I said before, use the pink, make a soft light facing this way, and then more predominantly on the right side, right? Because if you're gonna have white lights coming from this direction, her left, I should say, then what you want to do is you want to balance the contrast out by, again, having really strong rims on her right side. And that's what I did in several of my renders, actually, where I incorporated this method into my renders, and it looked really good. Now again, these were minus the background, so I didn't need to use the cone lights technique, but I mean, it could definitely work for this render specifically, so yeah, I recommend trying it out. Now, again, with the contrast and the color issues, right? Because as you can see, it looks very dull and damp and like just yucky, I guess, because there's just so much grays and not enough blacks and whites. I made a little like color correction, if you will, just to give an idea of how this could look if you wanted to go for a more vibrant image. Now, as you can see, I'm kind of over the top here, so I'd probably like turn this down a bit. But as you can see, there's a major difference in how these are used, basically, these values. Because what makes really good lighting is not the fact that you're using, oh look, I use so many lights and therefore I'm an expert. No, it's about how you use value. When you have 1 or 2 tones in, just like in 2D drawing, if you've ever heard of this, if you have very little value, it's going to bring down the contrast and the vibes, I guess, that it could potentially give off. Whereas if you have multiple shades and more than like 4 different kinds of tones, right, it'll really make this image pop. And that's what I want to do here with this image. The other thing that I'd recommend is setting your color management settings to sRGB and medium to high contrast, right? Because this could also be a result of using the filmic instead of sRGB. So what filmic does is it decreases the contrast and makes it look, you know, something that you'd see, I guess, in a movie, perhaps. And then for the contrast settings, it's set to medium by default, but my settings, I always change it to sRGB and medium high contrast because it really, again, helps me with bringing out the tones in my renders, and I think it'll help you too with this render. So yeah, that's something else I recommend. In terms of posing, so firstly, you have some issues with these legs here. So firstly, wow, I don't know what this bump here is. It looks like there's a bone here that you moved too far down and it's causing that to happen. So yeah, whatever that is, move it back up. It doesn't seem to be happening on this side, and hence why it's so obvious, and also because the camera is staring directly at it. So if you did sculpt it by accident, then sculpt it back. If it's a displaced bone, then you can press Alt-G to reset the location, Alt-R to reset the rotation, and Alt-S to reset the scale. Secondly, cuffs are pretty weird. Subdivide your polygons, because as you can see, you're having some troubles here where you can see the defined edges, whereas if you had turned on subdivision modifier, then this would be perfectly smooth. Also, you have this weird jagged, I don't even know what that is, like edge right there, I guess. So yeah, I'd recommend sculpting that if it is a sculpting issue. Or you could try turning on preserve volume, which should fix it most of the time. When I have like complicated clothing like these on a character and, you know, really, I guess, awkward poses for the mesh to replicate, then turning on preserve volume usually works, although sometimes I will have to sculpt it. And that's not really that hard. I'll probably make a sculpting tutorial in the future about how to fix your meshes if they do start acting up like this. But otherwise, yeah, try turning on preserve volume, you should be fine. Additionally, with the cuff right here, so as you can see, this cuff right here around her leg is facing towards the camera. More like that, right? And it's making these errors right here really, really obvious. So what I'd recommend, if there is a cuff bone for this pant leg, I suppose, then you should take that bone and rotate it this way. So I guess clockwise if you're looking at it from a 3/4 angle, X and Y, right? So that this cuff, rather than being open like this, facing towards the camera, it'd be more wrapped around the leg. And I will demonstrate this by making it a bit more obvious what I mean. So if this was, you know, the cuff, then that would be where the cuff was behind the image, and this would be where it would be in front, right? So yeah, same for this side. Now, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here, but that is a giant error. Especially with these, like, again, subdivide your polygons, but also, like, wrinkles and the cuff. Does this cuff go all the way around? I thought it did. It's like stopping right here and then doing like a double take. Like, wow. Whatever that is, another huge issue there as well. I guess, like, if you're looking at it from far back, it's not really that obvious, but again, just little nitpicks to help you improve your renders. Also, holy crap, you have immaculate hand posing. You did great making this like fist, I suppose, and then you did great on making sure this doesn't clip through her leg. However, this finger right here is indeed going through her leg, so I'd recommend fixing that. And also in terms of these fingers, right, so you have a nice arc, but it could be nicer, right? So what I'd recommend doing is taking this bone right here, so for the ring finger, and then making the entire ring finger go a little bit more up like that, right? So it's more closer to how the middle finger is posed, and then that'll give you an excuse to raise this one up so it's less of a complete like curve, right? Going all the way around. So yeah, more like that is how I do it. And then again, that bone, I believe it's called ring and pinky 1 respectively. I'm not sure though, I can't really remember. So yeah, there's that. Despite the polygonal issues, I really love this curve that you made with this buckle right here. That's really good and just shows the amount of detail that you put into your renders. Now, I'm pretty sure this is because her cuff leg, pant leg, whatever the heck is in front of her arm. But if her arm is going right through her leg, then I would again recommend fixing that just so that it looks more natural, I suppose. I didn't see any errors wrong before, like right now, but just in case it is, because that's just something that my mind gravitates to seeing a lot, is when people do sitting poses like this and then they just have the arm go right through the leg. Also, her arm bone looks like it was moved from its original position. Usually it's supposed to be right here, but it looks like he moved it and it's causing this little jarring thing, and then the lack of an arrow, I suppose, or crease right where her armpit should be. So I'd recommend moving that back again. The command is Alt-G, and make sure you select the bone beforehand so it actually does what you want it to. So there's that as well. Also, I can't tell if you moved her clavicles. Clavicles are the bones that sit right here, right below the neck and right above spine 5. If you did move them, I'd recommend taking her right one and moving it up a bit more so that, again, this jarring drop-off isn't as obvious and it is a little more clean. So yeah, that's what I would do. This, though, looks fine, so good job there. In terms of facial expressions, it looks okay. The only thing that I'd really have a hard time discerning is there's sort of a difference in what the eyebrows versus the eyes are telling. So here she looks like, just in terms of eyebrows, she looks like kind of mean, kind of scary, like, oh yeah, I'm so cool, you know, stuff like that. But then her eyes, she looks so tired. And I understand that minus just the texture and how she's supposed to look tired. It's just in terms of how the eyelids are. So the eyelid bones, upper and lower, respectively, L and R, it looks like you took the upper bones and then like turned them clockwise, I should say. So yeah, it looks like you turn them clockwise, and especially for this one, it's like she's not even looking at the camera. Now again, this one looks fine. I can kind of tell she's looking at the camera, but this one, she just like looks dead. So yeah, what I'd recommend doing is making her look more alive if she's supposed to be mean, and then if she's tired, then relax her eyebrows a lot. Yes, I guess I love how you pose the spine. You've got a really good line of action here. As you can tell, it's a very neat curve. I guess the only thing I'd really recommend doing is rather than have her head just sort of be stagnant, I'd raise her head up a bit more so that her chin is more facing the camera rather than face to face, right? Maybe that's just a stylistic thing that I prefer doing, but I feel like if you, like, even just a little smidge, like, rotating it upward would make a huge difference in how this character is presented in terms of if she looks mean, like, cool, or tired. So yeah, there's that, and really that's all I have to say for this render. It looks great otherwise, so good job on the posing. Alright, so right here I've ported in Gabrielle into my scene. Right here I increase the contrast by changing the sRGB settings as I recommended you to do, because as I demonstrated, it creates a really big difference, so I would recommend you do that. In the beginning, I started working on a complex pose, much like the one that I commentated on, solely so that there was some level of comparison between having a good pose and a bad pose. Now, I'm not saying that you had a bad pose, but just to level the playing field in terms of how complex something was, because I could have just done something standing and it would have been fine, but wouldn't have been the same. Right here, I incorporated my sculpting expertise into this right here so that her shoes were more level with the plane that I was working with. So again, as I said before, if you do need to sculpt things in, then I highly recommend you do so, and make sure to use shape keys, because you don't use shape keys and your mesh will be deformed forever and there's nothing you can do about it. I also fixed the thighs, which obviously are supposed to sit down if you're in a squatting position like so. And the knees had some very special things going on, so I corrected that as well. That's actually something we both had in common, was that there were problems with the knees that needed to be fixed, so. As for the head and spine, there wasn't really a really good angle that I wanted. For some reason, like, as I was working throughout this, I just kind of felt rusty. But that's besides the point. I tried multiple different angles for the head and neck, and I also tried multiple different angles for her spine and arms, because for her arms, I was really having trouble with getting them in the correct position where you could feel the gun's weight while also seeming, you know, anatomically correct. Here I also incorporated more sculpting because I felt that her back really needed it and it fit the camera angle. Here I'm just doing some standard gun posing. I don't like messing with Overwatch fingers just because of how limited they are, so hats off to Overwatch for being a AAA game and still not having correct metacarpal bones. This is the part where I struggled with the most and had to get a friend to weigh in on my opinion. My original thought was to have her kind of lean back and hold it, but turns out as I was experimenting more and as my friend showed me, that wasn't really possible with, you know, something weighing as much as potentially like 20 pounds as I imagine these shotguns would, and it wasn't entirely possible for something to be held at that diagonal of an angle, so that's something I struggled with as well, but corrected with the use of just trying it out in real life, which I also highly recommend that you, like, if you want to, you can do, because generally, it's a really easy way to spot if something's correct or not. Like, if you can hold something a certain way and still be able to grasp it. Like, for example, when there are thumbnail renders of people holding pickaxes, and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. And I'll tell them, hey, try actually holding something that's of that size. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, just like I'm gripping it a lot harder, you know, and the fingers are far more back than I had in the render. So use something like that to help fix your renders if you need to. I'm not sure if you noticed, but organizing your things really helps a lot in terms of having light control. As I said before, limiting the amount of lights you use in a really low contrast render can really help with how your values are portrayed. So if you have a set collection for lights, then you can go through them and figure out, oh hey, so what does this spotlight do? If it doesn't do anything, then get rid of it, right? In a more systematic manner than just having them all over the place. This is the part where I got into lighting. I wasn't really sure what I was going to start out with, but I wanted something similar to the render that I just finished critiquing. So I went for something that I recommended you do. So rim lights that are colored on one side and then strong white lights on the other, so that it would kind of match the vibe that you were going for and the set of lights that you wanted to have but didn't put into effect as easily. Now, I'm really big on having super strong highlights, so that's not something you had to do, but I added extra rims specifically for that purpose to really bring out the highlights, and later you'll see in the compositing section, I really made a focus on making sure these highlights were a little jarring, to be honest, but it's because it's part of my style. I'm not recommending you do exactly that, but if you're really having a hard time differentiating between the shadows and the highlights in your render, then try something like that. Again, it's a stylistic choice, so you don't have to do it. I added a blue color for a stylistic effect, but that's really just up to you. As long as you have at least 4 values, I'd say, in your render, then you're good. Here, I'm still messing around with making sure the lights are exactly as I wanted them to be, because again, I added a point light in front of her face so that you could see the skull shape a lot better. And I would almost recommend you to do that as well. Because based on what I saw, it was too low contrast for me to tell if there was any sort of light on her face. If you're having trouble trying to discern the person's facial expression because of how dark it is, then it's always a good idea to just add a pretty low wattage point light in front of their face so you can tell really easily. Put it in an area where it'll still be conducive to the camera angle and still cast shadows, but not so close that it just completely illuminates it with no regards to contrast at all. Alright, and here is the final render. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It took me a while to make, considering that that's a whole 16 minutes of commentary that I did. So hopefully it wasn't too overloading, but I'm glad you watched. So thank you, and I'll see you in about a week.